Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. It is I, late, the notoriously late and sanctimoniously notorious RMB here on a Monday with you people on Robservations live chat number 136. Robservations is, of course, the show about something. I found my Robservations t-shirt. I thought I'd put it in the laundry and wear it today. Welcome. I couldn't make it to the John Campea show this morning for some doctor reasons, not mine, but it all worked out in the end. So that is fantastic. And I want to welcome you to this live chat. Thanks for being here. Remember, YouTube analytics are now demanding people click like if they like this. I'd like to demand everybody subscribe, but if you don't want to do that, or either one, you don't have to. I just very much appreciate it if you did. So today, Monday, I've got more letters from people, although the reason I was late was because, well, I don't want to give you an excuse, but again, computer wackiness. It's very, very interesting, the wackiness that's been happening. Someone said, I read an article, I don't know if this was paranoid delusion or not, but that the government tested, like there was a test firing of the internet kill switch. That could be true. I don't know. I'm not one to buy into conspiracy theories, but perhaps that was it. That was it. And you never know if that's true or not. I got letters today, some good letters, but before I get to the letters, I was thinking about something. I read a lot of stuff on the internet. I have a lot of columnists that I enjoy, some people that think diametrically opposed to the way I think, but I enjoy reading them because I think they're cogent thinkers and I usually learn something. I reading stuff that I don't agree with necessarily helps me categorize and think about my own beliefs. Because I once heard when I was a kid, you should never know something. You should never absolutely know anything, because if you think you absolutely know anything, well, then you stop thinking about that thing because you think you already know it. And in this day and age, I think it's very important to always be testing your beliefs, because if your beliefs are true, just like scientific hypotheses, if they are correct and you are constantly testing them, the truth will stand up to scrutiny. That's what I've always believed. Truth will stand up to scrutiny. And that brings me around to, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. No, I won't give you an example, but I'll tell you why I was thinking about this. Two reasons. The first was I was thinking about the people that have been, I guess, branded the intellectual dork web. Maybe I'm the only person who's saying that, but I just like the fact that somebody hung that moniker on me and Nerdrotic, Gary Beekler, and Doomcock, and Midnight's Edge. I kind of like that we're the intellectual dork web. Maybe I'm the only one who does. But I was actually watching Doomcock put out a new video about Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And I have spent the weekend, to be honest, well, not the entire weekend, but I was spending the weekend watching all kinds of YouTube videos made by all kinds of different people about Galaxy's Edge, walkthroughs of everything, people building their lightsabers, people doing all kinds of things, making their R2 units and things like that. And Doomcock put out a video about how Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is not real Star Wars because it's only Disney Star Wars. And he suggested they should have made like a Death Star trench run roller coaster and all those things. And I always find Doomcock to be interesting, but I realized that I completely disagreed with what Doomcock was saying. And I was like, no, you shouldn't. Because even if Disney, and it's true, Disney's Star Wars Galaxy's Edge takes place after the original trilogy, and certainly that means before the prequel trilogy. But what I think is really cool about Galaxy's Edge, and I'm kind of a theme park junkie, not necessarily I go to every theme park I can, but I certainly love Disneyland. I'm a pass holder to Disneyland. And one of the things I was thinking about was what Disney did that I thought was amazing. Whether you agree with Disney Star Wars or not, Disney is now the custodian of the Star Wars franchise. And what I really liked about their Imagineers, and what I've always loved about Disney parks as a whole, is their idea to strive for an experiential time at the theme parks. That's what they're looking for. They're looking to give people an experience. So when you go into their theme parks, you're sort of immersed in another world. And Galaxy's Edge is the pinnacle of that desire. And what I think is really interesting is they've created Star Wars Galaxy's Edge takes place on a new planet in the Star Wars universe that we haven't actually seen, the planet Batu. And they have a whole mythology behind it. And it takes place in sort of a, not Mos Eisley, but sort of a, I don't know, a port, like I think more of a space Casablanca. Is that's kind of how I felt about it, watching all the different videos that people were posting and building their droids, which are really cool, and building their lightsabers and getting Jedi holocrons. You got to hand it to them. These three things that are quite pricey, the way they have interactivity and mix and match, not just interactivity at home if you buy the different chips or the different color kyber crystals, but how you're actually in the park and your R2 unit will respond, or your astromech droid, and you don't have to get an R2 unit, you can get other units, but how there's interactivity in the park. I think that's pretty ingenious. I think that the idea they've figured out a perfect way to make you spend lots of money on their products that they're selling, such as the lightsabers and the R2 units or the astromech droids. And there's interactivity there, and it adds to the whole experience. Sure. Is it a shameless cash grab? Sure, but I don't think it's shameless at all. They've tried to make you spend lots of money, but they've also created an experience that's overall feeding into your experience of the park. And the thing that I've seen people talk about is when they make their lightsabers, because they're thick and heavy, that even putting them together and having that experience, having that immersive experience, until we get VR that's completely immersive, I think Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is the next best thing. And one of the things that I think that people should remember is the reason that Disney Park would focus on the Disney era of Star Wars is that they own it all. There's not a designer wouldn't come back and say, I designed the trenches of the Death Star. From a corporate standpoint, they have to do that. And we always talk about our corporate overlords. That's true. But I don't mind, in the case of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, that they are, in fact, doing that, because they own it all. So there's not going to be somebody like deciding that, I was the one who really created the Borg and demanding money and things like that. Their chain of title over Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is completely clear. And I think that's kind of neat. And from what I've seen, having not been there, looking at all the videos that I've watched, they've really knocked it out of the park with the experience. I mean, people are writing about how they're crying. They're talking about all these different experiences they're having. And that's what it's supposed to be. Like, if you're going to a Disney park, you want to experience what they've provided with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And, you can be a cynic. Yeah. Do they want to make money? Yes. They spent $1 billion making Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. I have no problem. I can't wait to go myself. They should be making money from it. So there you go. That's just my thoughts for the day. And so I can enjoy people who I disagree with on YouTube, vehemently disagree with in the case of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, but I can still watch their videos and get enjoyment out of them, which brings me to something else I've been thinking about. Now, in my entire life, the way I've always consumed stories, whether it was a novel, whether it was a movie, whether it was a television show, I've always approached the story, at least to my mind, as a sort of what if scenario, and would I do that? So, and I often, in my own mind, I often go back to, I think, the perfect what if. What I mean by that is whatever story you're watching, doesn't matter what it's about, it's a what if scenario. So what if Amity Island was under siege by a giant man-eating shark on the busiest tourist day of the year, the 4th of July? What if? What would happen? And that immediately is enticing to me as an audience member, as a viewer. I'm like, what's going to happen? Like, I don't know. And would I, meaning would me, Rob Burnett, as I sat in the movie theater, would I do what the protagonist is doing? In the case of Jaws, it would be Sheriff Brody. He's the everyman. That's how we're seeing the story. Would I do what Sheriff Brody does in that situation? Now, here's the thing. I'm not a sheriff. I'm not a man who is scared of the water that moved to an island community. So I wasn't a police officer on the mainland, then moved to an island community for a simpler life. I was none of those things. But there's enough in all of the great stories that make me as a viewer understand what the protagonist is up against. Now, I don't have to be a cop. I don't have to be an island dweller, even though, truth be told, I did grow up on Mercer Island, which was an island. It was only separated by the mainland by 2 bridges. You had to swim otherwise. But there's enough within the story to make me understand his plight. Even when I saw Jaws in 1975 for the first time, my first PG movie, actually my second PG movie in the theater. The first was The Land That Time Forgot. But there's enough in that story, even as an 8-year-old, where I identified with Sheriff Brody. I understood the plight of him, even though the details of his character were not something I necessarily believed in, but I got it. As a kid, I always identified with Captain Kirk. I don't know what it was like to go through Starfleet Academy. I don't know what it was like to be an ensign on the Farragut when my captain and half the crew was killed by the vampire cloud that we so later saw in Obsession. But I think all of our stories that we love, we first are attracted to the what if scenario. What if, I don't know, what if you're an alien from the planet Krypton and you descend to Earth, or in Superman 2, you have to the 3 outlaws from Krypton descend to Earth to confront the Man of Steel in a cosmic battle for world supremacy. That's what it says on the one sheet. Now, what if you were that person? What would it be like? And I think that that's true of most stories. At least I always thought that was true. And it didn't matter. Like when I saw, for instance, The Color Purple, Whoopi Goldberg's character, Celie, I completely identified with that character. Now, was I a black woman in that time period, in that part of the world, in that part of the United States? Did I know what it was like to suffer that kind of abuse? Did I know what it was like to fall in love with Suge Avery? No. I know none of those things. But as a human being, her character was somebody that I identified with. I saw the story through her eyes, and there was enough in The Color Purple, which is a movie I dearly liked, and I love Spielberg's follow-up to Color Purple, Empire of the Sun. I don't know what it's like to be an upper crust British kid stuck in Shanghai during the outbreak of World War II. No idea what that was like. Don't have no idea. But both of those movies, I heavily identified with the protagonist and the story that was being told. Now, the details of those characters, the details of their lives, no, I certainly could not identify or know what it was like. But the narrative, at least I always thought the narrative puts a viewer, puts an audience into the situation where they understand the what if scenario and the would I act the way that the protagonist acts. And that's what makes stories so interesting, is you're constantly gauging, at least I do, my own reaction to the narrative and what characters would do and what they didn't do. I'd be like, oh man, I wouldn't have done that. Like I frequently feel that way in horror movies. You know, when somebody goes into a dark room in a horror movie because they don't know they're in a horror movie. And you're like, don't go in there. But invariably they do, and they get slaughtered because of it. So I'm constantly, and I thought this was something that everybody did. I just thought that was something that we all did. Here's Gilbert, everybody. Gilbert is here. He's licking his chops. I'm going to leave. I thought everybody did that. Didn't they? Doesn't everybody do that? Don't you? I don't know if that's true or not. Gilbert is here. Since he is here when I was talking. Okay, buddy. Somebody going to come up here? Oh, you can't really see this, but I've got this great trick now. Oh, wait. Maybe you can. Okay, you guys. Sit. You going to sit? Sit. Good girl. Gilbert, sit. Sit, buddy. Now, what I do is, I don't know if you can see this, but they each get these at exactly the same time. No, Tulu, that's yours. And that's yours. So there you go. It's this thing I've trained them to do where they get their cookies at exactly the same time. If they sit, and if they stay sitting, did Tallulah drop hers? If they stay sitting, good boy. Sit, Tallulah, you sit. And you get cookies at the same time. There you go. So they're only going to get 2 cookies. So I thought that I thought the world, that's how the world saw films. Well, now I bring it around to people that I read and watch on the internet. There is a film columnist that I've been reading for the better part of a quarter of a century, Jeffrey Wells. He has a current site, Hollywood-elsewhere.com. Hollywood-elsewhere.com. Now, he's a pretty divisive figure in on the internet, but I think he's a great writer. He clearly loves cinema. He has lots of interesting ideas about people and the world around him, but that's what makes him him. And I really appreciate his writing. And sometimes I feel like he's completely out of time and out of place. Other times he writes a lot of crazy stuff that makes my gums bleed. But for the most part, his love of cinema, and he travels around. He just got back from the Cannes Film Festival. Anyway, regardless of what you think of him, I read him every day. I've read him every day for the better part of 25 years. And he wrote an article yesterday called Fundamental Movie Watching Aesthetic. That was the headline of the article. And I'm going to read some of it to you. I'm going to read some of this headline to you because it shocked me. Not shocked me, but I was like, But I guess the responses shocked me. So I'm going to read a little bit of this. Fundamental movie watching aesthetic. In yesterday's thread about Anna DuVernay's When They See Us, Mr. F said something that I regarded as borderline astonishing. No matter how often I see it, he said, I remain amazed at Jeff Wells' ability to criticize a character or person for acting differently than he would. Mr. F was apparently serious. He was saying that the correct way to watch a drama is to immerse yourself in the basics, story, character, milieu, tone, but without drawing upon your own life experience for perspective or judgment. Maintain a strict distance, Mr. F was saying. By all means, submit to whatever the characters are going through, all the while considering their various motives, dreams, delusions, and appetites, but do so impersonally. You'll only muck things up if you merge the story with your own saga or knowledge of how life works. Turn off your mind, forget what you know, dumb yourself down. Let me explain something very clearly, Wells writes. I've always put myself into the narrative, and especially the shoes of various characters. And I always ask myself, is this how I'd play my cards? Or is this how I'd react? If not, I say, what then are their motives for acting in a way that I don't agree with? Why would they behave in a way that seems a little outside my realm, or which doesn't seem to make basic sense? I've been watching films, plays, and TV dramas this way for decades. Hell, since I was 7 or 8 years old. I have an idea that tens of millions of others do the same. Yes, Mr. Wells. Yes, Jeff. We've had dinner together. I can say Jeff. I have an idea that tens of millions of others do the same. I thought so too. But I don't think I've ever come across something that articulated it the way you're doing here quite now. Then he talks about basic drama has always been to merge the proverbial audience member with the experience, mindset, and emotional leanings of the lead character or characters. The idea has always been to walk a mile in these characters' shoes, and once you've gotten to know them, decide for yourself if he or she is living life sensibly or radically or dangerously or brilliantly or something in between. If you don't use your own life experience to assess the wisdom or bravery of a given character to determine whether he or she is acting foolishly or clumsily with enviable political skills, if you're not bringing what you know into a narrative and making assessments of various characters based on what you do or what you wouldn't do if you were in their shoes, if you're not engaging with drama as a human being with memories, emotions, and regrets of your own, then what the hell are you doing? Mr. F feels that the best way to watch a film is to adopt the mentality of a cupcake or a toaster or a chunk of mozzarella cheese. Mr. F's quote, "It's a mistake if you're evaluating character choices based on what you would do, assuming it's clear from the narrative why they're doing what they're doing. It's just empathy." Wells to Mr. F, "You can't have empathy without feelings of allegiance or identification, or at least understanding. You have to be persuaded to emotionally join this or that character's team, even if they may not be the nicest people you've ever met. Failing that, you have to be persuaded that a character's reasons for doing what he or she does at least make sense to them. That's almost always what you get when the screenplay is first rate. Now, Sasha Stone, who is another online columnist who I've always followed, I think she's great as well. She frequently collaborates with Jeff Wells, doing things like Oscar podcasts and things like that. She said, you can't put yourself in their shoes. You just can't. It's not possible. And Wells goes on to explain, she meant the unjustly persecuted and jailed Central Park Five from Anna DuVernay's latest miniseries, When They See Us, which, by the way, I watched the first episode. It's amazing. You have to watch it. My suburban white bread experience, Sasha was saying, makes me incapable of understanding anything about these guys, what they were about, or what was driving them onward, or whatever. They might as well be microbes from planet Jupiter, Sasha basically meant. Well, Wells goes on to say, bullshit to that. The screenplay and the acting and When They See Us happen to be good enough to allow me to relate, to discover parallels between what these poor guys went through and my own experiences and understandings. This is what makes a film good. Either you build bridges between the audience and the characters, or you don't. I love this, and I totally subscribe to what Mr. Wells was saying here. I've always believed in the what if, would I way of looking at any kind of narrative, really. That's, to me, the fun of narrative. And that's how I learn. Because sometimes in great movies, characters do things. I mean, there are a couple movies right off the top of my head with protagonists that are kind of douchebags, but I love them. Ralph Fiennes' character, Kanemashi, in what? How am I not The English Patient? One of my favorite movies of all time. I don't know why these things, sometimes they just go away. But I love Ralph Fiennes in that movie. I worship Ralph Fiennes in that movie. Mickey Rourke in 9.5 Weeks. Total douchebag. Really is a douchebag, but he's very handsome in that movie. He's rich and he has great taste in women. Now, I can watch him and I can think he's a douche, but I can relate to him. And at the end of the day, I think to myself, how could you have treated Kim Basinger like that and let her go? He's such a douchebag that at the end of the movie, he still thinks that he has such power over Kim Basinger that she's going to come back to him. He's a douche, but I like watching him because he makes choices that I wouldn't make, which reaffirms my greatness if I was ever able to date Kim Basinger, because I would understand and recognize what she really wanted. We'd live happily ever after. Richard Chance, William Peterson's character in To Live and Die in L.A., is a douchebag. He's got macho swagger to burn. He treats he avails himself of his informants and sexually uses them and threatens them when it suits him. Douchebag. He's a douchebag. Love him. I mean, and yet these guys, not people I admire. But I do watch movies, and I always put up. I do put myself up against them, and that's part of how I learn too. That's douchebaggery behavior. That's bad behavior. I'm not going to act like that. Even though I love these movies, part of the reason I love those movies is at the end of the day, when you're asking yourself, well, what if I wanted to take down a master counterfeiter and I actually had to rip off a dude to get the money that I needed to make a buy? If I had to do something totally unlawful in order to do something that is actually good, would I do that? So it's the what if scenario, and then would I? You ask yourself, would you do those things? And the great thing about To Live and Die in LA is there's arguments to be made one way or another, even though it all goes horribly awry in the end. Now, I understand what people are saying. People are saying that, you as a middle-aged white dude, how can you possibly identify with the young men that are being detailed in When They See Us? Well, superficially, you can't, obviously, but a narrative makes you understand as a human being. Take away the superficial differences or the racial differences, or let's strip it down to the human essence. And I think a great narrative teaches you something about the milieu, the world those characters live in, makes you understand. This is what great storytelling does. It makes you understand, even though you're probably very far away from where those gentlemen were when this. You have no understanding what their experience is, but you can understand them from a human standpoint. The human standpoint, ultimately, you can distill. You can distill these things down into the essence of humanity, and that's why stories work. Great storytelling has something to offer, I think, everyone. Now, a lot of people disagreed. A lot of people don't. I didn't know this because I really have never articulated this idea very much to people. Gilbert, please. Gilbert. Maybe somebody's here. Somebody comes over. See, everybody asks me, why don't I put them in the backyard? If I put them in the backyard, they would just, no, they're both barking. Hey, kids. Why are you both? Yo, Tallulah, come here. I'm fighting against my, anyway, I'm sorry they're barking. I tried. There's somebody outside that they're more interested in than me. I've never heard them both bark like this. Gilbert and Tallulah, please stop. Oh, now they're calling. Anyway, so the first comment on, wow. You know, these dogs are actually very well disciplined, but there's people coming in the door and they want to join those people. So anyway, the first the first comment on Jeff's this post was from somebody named Bren Kilko, who says, the job of the dramatist is to allow you to relate to the character on some level. The imaginative leap that is demanded is not that you ignore your own responses, but that you see yourself in the character by considering yourself with or without certain abilities, having been molded or scarred by experiences you've never had, social stresses you've never faced. There is no dramatic satisfaction or understanding to be derived from sitting in judgment of characters with whom you are asked to identify. Rather, you must occupy a middle ground between critical detachment and imaginative empathy. What if I were there, and what if I were like that? I was like, man, do we park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay? If you're not a 14-year-old black kid, you're not a 44-year-old black man. For that matter, you're not a 44-year-old white man, but at least you have some distance frame of reference. But I'll disagree with Sasha this much. If the filmmakers fail to make us feel at some level what it was like to be that terrified, exhausted kid in that situation, then that's on them, because that's their job. And when I read this, I was like, man, I totally agreed with all of that. Now, I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's how I've always thought about movies. And that's how I've always approached stories. And I think, I watch a Marvel movie, I identify with both Tony Stark and Captain America, not so much Thor, but, you watch these characters and you wonder, what would I do? That's why those memes exist. Is that true or not for you? I don't know, guys. Go back in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Raven is here. Raven says, hi, Rob. Subscribed and liked. I even hit the bell. Thank you, Raven. Sujith says, hey, Rob, curious to know your views on the Robotech anime. I loved it growing up, still holds up. Mature themes for a children's show. Well, I love when people ask this question because then I can do this. You used to be able to see this, but you can't see this now. This is an actual, real working motorcycle helmet. They put these out in 2015 for the 30th anniversary of Macross, which is the first part of Robotech. This is Roy Fokker's motorcycle helmet. It is a real, like I said, it's a real motorcycle helmet. It's fantastic. I love the original animes better. But I do love Robotech. I do love Southern Cross, and I do love Genesis Climber and Mospeada that were all brought here as Robotech. I collect Valkyries, and I love Valkyries in all of their modes, in Jurwalk mode. And there's one of the coolest things I've seen. Even I couldn't drop the green on it, but they made a 1/6 scale Valkyrie cockpit. You can still get maxes. They're very expensive. They have light up. That's amazing. Love Robotech, and I wouldn't call it a children's show. Factual opinion is here, and he says, "Woof, Gilbert, please." I know, right? Let's see. I've got letters today. I do have letters, and for many of you that who maybe there's some of you who've never been here before. If you want to send me a letter, please send me a letter to the Burnettwork.net. I love getting them, but please tell me if you want me to read your letter on the air. If you don't, or you want me to read it anonymously, that's okay too. I'm going to read this letter from Anthony T. Anthony T. I love this letter, actually. Hey, Rob, and greetings, fellow imagination connoisseurs. I have never seen Star Trek. To be honest, when I was younger, I didn't understand why people did. I thought Star Trek was just a nerdy show. Obviously, I was more into being cool than watching quality TV. But I don't think when I was younger, I would have appreciated the show the way I can today. I used to think I used to think Return of the Jedi was my favorite Star Wars film because it had the best lightsaber battle. Now I know differently. Anyways, the more I listen to everyone discussing Star Trek on your show, the more enticed I have been to see just what this show is about and if I would actually like this sort of show. So I finally took the dive. I had a couple of questions regarding the first episode and pilot I hope you could answer. What happened to Captain Pike? I thought he did great. But when you watch the next episode, he's no longer the captain of the USS Enterprise. I was kind of wondering why that happened. I thought he did great and the pilot was fun to watch. The way Pike figures out those big brain aliens were smart. I think I got hooked. But then I watched episode 1 where it's a different captain and it kind of threw me off. But luckily, not for long. Captain Kirk is pretty good too. In that first episode, the woman here who, spoilers, he doesn't want to say, is the old love, the woman who is, quote unquote, I guess, woman, the old love interest of Dr. McCoy, who turns out to be an alien and the last of her kind. Why does she not kill the professor sooner? I felt that was really the only thing I didn't understand in that episode. It was a great mystery trying to figure out who she was and how to find her. But why did she kill the professor on the ship when she could have done that at any other time? Not to mention, why does she kill him at all? Either way, she definitely killed a lot of people and crew members, which I didn't see coming. Thanks, Anthony T. Well, Anthony T, you brought up a couple of good points when it comes to watching Star Trek, the original series. First of all, because of the way people watch shows now, they always end up watching The Cage first. And unfortunately, when you're watching the original series, watching The Cage first robs you of an incredible experience with the original show. Now, The Cage was a failed pilot. It was the first Star Trek pilot that was commissioned by the network. It was the first thing that Gene Roddenberry did. And yes, indeed, The Cage is truly the first episode of Star Trek ever made. However, that pilot was rejected and it was never aired originally on TV. It was later aired in the late 80s, but it was not aired as part of Star Trek's syndication package. It was not originally aired as part of the show. Why was it not aired? Because in one of the most brilliant moments in television history, in the first season of the original series, they decided to use that unaired pilot as part of the only two-part episode, the Menagerie, parts 1 and 2, that was part of the first season of Star Trek, that they used that episode to flash back to a time before Kirk was in command of the Enterprise, and that was when Star Trek canon was born. We saw incidents from over a decade before Kirk was captain of the Enterprise, and it was fascinating. Spock was the way we got into that because we saw where Spock was, and we learned, wow, you served on the Enterprise under another captain. How interesting was that? So you find out what happened to Captain Pike. Captains only had a certain amount of time captaining their starships, and then they were replaced, or they were promoted, or they went somewhere else. We never understood, or we never learned why Pike left command of the Enterprise, only that he did. And he does have a tragic ending. So you might want to check that out. I hope you get to the Menagerie part 1 and 2, and it'll answer all of your questions, although it might be a little redundant. But I kind of hate the fact that The Cage, The Cage, that episode is part of Star Trek because it should be like an addendum or special feature, because it's so wonderful coming across the Cage as incorporated in the Menagerie. It's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant conceit. Really awesome. And the first episode, by the way, the man trap that was aired is also aired out of order, because the second pilot the network commissioned, where no man has gone before, is the third episode in the broadcast order. And that's dumb. Why they did that, I have no idea. So you really should start out with the third episode, where no man has gone before. And then even then, that's got canonical references, because it looks more like The Cage than later on the show did. And you kind of see there's a progression. So there's between the original The Cage, where no man has gone before, and then the first episode that was actually aired, The Man Trap, you see a progression, like time went by. And it's really interesting to see. And immediately Star Trek establishes canonical Star Trek, which is fascinating to watch. But those questions you ask about the salt vampire, the last of her race, I think the reason she didn't kill the professor is because everybody, even a salt vampire, wants companionship. And the professor knew about her and allowed her to live, did not destroy her. And I think they developed some kind of a, if maybe not a friendship, a mutual respect, a symbiotic relationship. And clearly the professor wanted to preserve this alien creature. And I think ultimately the story of the salt vampire is a tragic story, and proves that what most people might first think is an evil alien is actually, in fact, a tragic being, the last of her race. And I can't say why necessarily she killed the professor. I think she was just desperate and probably saw her situation as futile, and that there was nowhere to go, and that she had to resign herself to her fate. And maybe in a way she loved the professor and wanted to take him with her, that couldn't abide him living on without her. I don't know. But I think that's open to interpretation. That's what makes Star Trek so great, is it gives you the opportunity to do that. So I want to thank you, Anthony, for your letter. I thought that was a very great letter. I look forward, like we've got Willow Yang here, as everyone knows, going through Star Trek, the original series, the first time, and she's written some very cogent, very interesting analyses of these episodes, which I can't wait to read more, hint, hint. And it's nice to hear from you as well. This next letter comes from, it's a quick one, from Mason A. Hey, Rob, before I ask my question, I would just like to say thank you for reading my previous letter. Well, thank you for writing it. With the 30th anniversary of the first Michael Keaton Batman movie coming up, I can't believe it is, by the way, I was at the world premiere in Westwood of Batman. You can see a very funny picture of me that I kind of look like Zach from Saved by the Bell holding up my ticket. But I was there. I'm curious about who your favorite actor to play Batman was. Thanks again, Mason and Dave in Ottawa, Canada. That's interesting. I have to say that I think ultimately my favorite actor to play Batman was Christian Bale. I did like Ben Affleck, but I did like, there was something I liked in Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, and George Clooney even. But I think, and of course I loved Adam West growing up. But to my mind, here's something that you might find interesting. I don't feel that my definitive version of what I believe the Batman character to be has ever been portrayed on screen, if that makes any kind of sense. I just don't feel that I've ever seen that before. They've come close. Christian Bale certainly did. Ben Affleck certainly did. Michael Keaton did in a way, but the fact that the character of Bruce Wayne also, to me, always has to be at least physically imposing. And the portrayal of Michael Keaton, obviously, is not the most physically imposing guy, but I did like his portrayal of Bruce Wayne quite a bit. But I'd have to say Christian Bale has been my favorite so far. Ben Affleck probably being a close second. I appreciate the letter. Now, this next letter I'm not going to read entirely. I can't. But it's from Jason Manwiller. And he says, "Greetings, Rob. I hope you had an amazing weekend. I first want to say to you, just two simple but powerful and meaningful words. Thank you. I have been watching you since your first appearance on Collider Heroes, and I thank Schnepp for introducing you to me. God, I miss the big guy. I do too. I am saying thank you because your show, these Robservations, have provided me not only a sense of intelligent conversation of everything we love in this, the Post-Geek Singularity, but also a safe haven for me to express ideas and not be called names like shill or any of the other degrading terms used online these days. I also want to say thank you for your continued pursuit of a positive attitude in this sphere and towards our franchises. I want to thank you for that, Jason. Now, Jason goes on to ask me about some people that I know and continue to work with and how they particularly might have conveyed a sense of entitlement about not being invited to the opening of a certain, let's just say, theme park attraction that opened recently. And the sense of entitlement and is bothered by that and what I think about that. Here's what I think about, I would say, the perks of the job. The perks of the job, I most recently was invited on May 10th. I went and saw Godzilla King of the Monsters. I was invited by the director, and he got me into an influencer party that was happening beforehand with free food and free booze. And then I got to go watch the lighting ceremony. It was great. It was great fun. All of these perks that we, as whether we're online pundits or critics, all of these perks are gifts. And we should never feel entitled to receive them. They're gifts. They're great things. They're wonderful experiences, but we should never, simply because of what we do, feel entitled to get them. Now, it's hard not to sometimes. You just get used to it. You live in LA. I used to go to screenings all the time. Heck, I used to be invited to the Saturn Awards for a long time. For 20 years, I don't get invited to the Saturn Awards anymore. Does it bum me out? Yes. But I haven't, necessarily done anything. The last time I really went to the Saturn Awards, well, I have won 3 Saturn Awards in my life, which has been pretty nice. But I don't feel that I deserve to go. And I think that we should all of us in the online pundit space and in the critical establishment, we should feel privileged that we do get invited to these events. And if we don't get invited to these events, there's no reason for us to get online and to be disgruntled or feel upset. I think that's bad form. Because all of these are all luxury items. And we should feel grateful if you get one luxury item a year or a luxury item every week. They're still luxury items, and we should always take stock in the fact that, hey, we get to be invited places and go places and experience things and meet people that we wouldn't meet and interact with celebrities we wanted to meet. It's all a perk of the job. And it's like everything else. When you've had it a long time, you take it for granted. Kind of like the entire America, our Bill of Rights, the fact that we have elections, we all take it for granted. And eventually we don't participate as much as we should, but it's all a perk. It's all a luxury. And I'm honored to be a part of it. And I think that anybody who else is in this space should feel honored as well. And I don't think, especially if you feel you've been slighted, it's really not the best form to go online and express that discontent. At least that's the way I think about it. But Jason, I want to thank you for your letter. I really appreciate hearing from you. Thought that was great. And let's see, I have one more. Well, let's see if anybody sent me any any chats in. Let's see if what you guys are out there saying today, and there are. Factual Opinion says, thoughts on Pet Sematary 2019. I love Stephen King. Well, Factual Opinion, I have not seen it. Although I heard that the cat who was in the new Pet Sematary has passed away, and I feel bad. As a Stephen King fan, I was a Stephen King fan. I was a Stephen King fan back into the 1970s. And the first, I'm going to tell you when the first thing I read. Let's see, the first Stephen King thing that I ever read, and I can tell you exactly when. It was published in February 1978. So February of 1978, I would have been 10. I would have been 10 years old. So the first thing that I ever read from Stephen King was Night Shift. And I was 10 years old, and I was a voracious reader, and I loved horror novels. I've talked about how I was reading wholly inappropriate horror novels. So I was a huge Stephen King fan. Night Shift set me on my way. Then, of course, I got to go back, and I got to go find Carrie, and I'd read Carrie. up to that point. I'd read Carrie already. No, Night Shift was the first. You know what? I knew about the movie Carrie, but I'm wrong. I might have said I read Carrie first. I didn't. I read Night Shift first. Night Shift was the first. Then I read more Stephen King. I read Carrie. I read Salem's Lot. I think I read The Shining at that point. I'm not sure. But I was a huge Stephen King fan. And after reading Night Shift, because it was like, wow, it was like Twilight Zone. And that's when I also started my love of horror anthologies. I love, still to this day, give me best new horror. You know, I love horror anthologies. I have hundreds of them. And I love them very, very much. But Night Shift was my first. So the reason I bring all this up is because back in the day, it was known and it was publicized in the press by Stephen King himself that he had written this book, Pet Sematary, that he thought was too scary to be published. And this was like for years. Maybe I first heard about this in 79 or 80. And that's like catnip to a kid. It's like, ooh, you tell somebody it's too scary to read. It's like, what do you want to do? Read it. I wanted to read that book badly. And of course, eventually, I think now that it's so easy for me to look, let's find out, shall we? I'll find out with you. You find out with me. When was Pet Sematary? I want to say 82. I want to say 82. That's what I remember it coming out. Pet Sematary originally came out 83, November 14th, 1983. Well, there you go. That means that Pet Sematary came out after Return of the Jedi. I actually read Firestarter in line for Empire Strikes Back like the 16th time I saw it. I think it came out in September of 1980, but it's okay. November of 83. Pet Sematary finally came out, finally got released in hardcover. I don't think I could have, I don't know how I got to the, no, I was driving. So I was driving by then. I had my driver's license. I picked that book up. I remember I bought it at a B. Dalton bookseller. And I remember going into it. I bought it at Bellevue Square, the B. Dalton Books in Bellevue Square. And they had like this pyramid stack of Pet Sematary hardcovers. You know, I had to go through and pick the one that had the no dents in the cover, the dust jacket, perfect cover. And I went home and I read that book basically in one sitting. And it was to this day, is the scariest book I ever read. So I've not seen the movie, to answer your question, 2019. I want to see it, but I've heard it was disappointing. I don't know. So there you go. JB Bonifacio says, the Gennady Tarkovsky Clone Wars run gets no love. It certainly got love from me. I loved it when it first came out. I love sort of the anime-inspired action. I loved it. I think it's just been forgotten in the wake of the new Clone Wars. I mean, it was been sort of swept aside like the Old Republic was. But I loved it. I thought it was great. Willow Yang says, I was so confused when I first watched The Cage. Wait, that's not William Shatner. I know. Now, as much as I love The Cage, even when they first found it, when they first put it out, there were sequences that they had to put in black and white, and then they found a version where they could put it all out in color. By the way, when they released The Cage on home video, they released a dope poster for it. Paramount Home Video made a really cool poster. But it bums me out that people are watching the original series and they watch The Cage first, because it's much better, at least in my mind, to watch the Menagerie Part 1 and 2. It's a much better experience. And if you've seen The Cage first, then it's just boring and redundant. When I was a little kid, the Menagerie Part 1 and 2, I loved it so much to see that glimpse of the Star Trek that could have been and never was, but was once. I loved it so much. And it bums me out that people watch The Cage first. They should go back and they should make The Cage like episode 80, and call it an adjunct or some kind of a special feature or something, because it bums people out. And they should have reorganized. I understand the broadcast order, the production order. I get all that, but they should always have renumbered, made it where No Man Has Gone Before should always be the first episode people watch of Star Trek. But that's just me. Mark C says, do you feel some might give a kinder review to a film just so they don't lose their perks? Yes. To be honest, I think it's really hard when the studio but here's the thing. It's not as if the studio doesn't know when they have a great movie on their hands and when they have a not so great movie on their hands. They already know. Their marketing reflects that. And so they're not surprised when a movie is poorly reviewed. They're not surprised. I would say that, there's an X-Men movie coming out. It hasn't been reviewed. And it's coming out this week. When does that embargo drop? They know. Studios know. So I think that there was in the early days, I know that Harry Knowles, who founded Ain't It Cool News, he would always get uh, pounded for giving movies more favorable reviews than they probably deserved. But he never said he was some reputable critic from a large like the New York Times. He was just writing for his own website. And I think, look, it is very intoxicating when you're flown places and you get to go on to set visits. Just like myself, I mean, when I watch a movie in the process of being made, I respect the process and I see how much love. Here's the thing. Nobody half-asses it on a movie when they're making it. No one. They're trying to make the best possible movie they can, and there's the hope for everybody that's working on a movie that they're making something that's going to be transcendent in the genre. They're all trying as hard as they can. It does become apparent as things go on whether that's going to be the case or whether a movie is going to suck. You can tell. But everybody hopes that a movie comes out great. It's too hard. There's too much money being spent. There's too much love and affection put into every frame, and people are putting too much of themselves. You want every movie to be great. But when they don't turn out great, and usually I think the reason that movies don't turn out great is because they lack a certain vision, and the person with the vision might not have the ability to execute that vision, or they're getting pushback. Look, making a movie at the studio level is one of the hardest things in the world, because not only are you, as a director, say, managing, you have to bring a vision to the table, you also have to manage everyone else's vision as well, and fight for your own vision, which seems counterproductive, counterintuitive, and indeed it is. But it's crazy that movies get made at all. But yes, Mark C., I feel some people will give a kinder review to a film. Or, when you go to a premiere, everybody's excited to see it and you have a great experience. I love Godzilla King of the Monsters. My opinion was not, look, just because my friend made the movie, I'm not going to give a good review just because he made the movie. I can recognize, knowing him, how much of himself and how much love and respect to the kaiju genre he put into the film. I loved it for that reason. I mean, the Godzilla franchise has movies like Godzilla's Revenge and Godzilla versus Megalon, which are movies that I enjoy for various reasons, but they're not good. So when I see Godzilla King of the Monsters, I see what he was going for, and I really respect and enjoy what he was doing. And I was pumped to see the film, and I got out of it what I wanted to get out of it, which I thought was good. I mean, I got out of the movie what I was hoping to get out of the movie. And yeah. And so that's kind of, I don't know, that's where I'm coming from, people. That's where I'm coming from, if that makes any sense at all. Victor Acosta says, it really kills me that such a classic story as the Phoenix Saga has basically been trashed by Hollywood twice now. Justice for Phoenix. Yeah, it is. Well, let's wait till the jury's out. I mean, I've not heard good things about Dark Phoenix, but hope springs eternal, and I don't want to pillory it until I've seen it. But yeah, it's interesting because why don't they just go back to the source material and adapt it? I don't understand. Let's see. Mech Random 42 is here. Hello, Mech Random 42. King of the Monsters was just fun. It was a Godzilla movie. What more can you ask for in a Godzilla movie? I don't know. I got from it what I get from a lot of Godzilla movies. I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. And it's interesting because it's funny when people, I find it interesting when people review the movie they didn't get as opposed to people reviewing the movie that they did get. Like, when I try not to do that, although people could say, "Oh, you review Star Trek Discovery as a show, you review it as something you didn't get." No, I don't. I review it as something that it isn't, not something that I didn't get, and that's what bothers me. I think that by any metric, whether I like Star Trek or not, I think Discovery didn't work in that sense. So I try and review things for what they are. And by the way, I think I'm a pretty forgiving critic. When I go into something, I'm going, okay, this is a Godzilla movie. Do the filmmakers know what it is? I found Godzilla 2014, as much as I admired a lot of it, I found it to be ultimately lacking because they were trying to change what it was. Godzilla, again, I always talk about the inherent whimsy that's inherent in the format of a Godzilla film with giant monsters, and you need to embrace that. I thought Pacific Rim did a great job of doing that because Guillermo del Toro gets it, and Mike Doherty completely gets it. What I find interesting is that our sensibilities, I think a lot of, especially the genre community, the genre pundits, it's not necessarily something, although a lot of pundits really liked it. But even audiences, not just the genre, but audiences are expecting more of a serious slant. They want these movies to not have a whimsy to them. And I find that kind of interesting. Whether I'm correct or not, you'll have to, that's up for you to decide. And that's why we get to do things like have these long form conversations where we discuss and debate all of those things. Okay, this next one comes from James Ito. Been tasked to organize a convoy live fire exercise with heavy weapon systems. I appreciate war movies editing out planning phases. Hashtag boring to watch. I love this. Alfred Hitchcock famously once said, and perhaps this is a paraphrase, but drama is life with all the boring bits cut out. And I agree with that. And here's another thing about how I watch movies. Now, clearly, when you're watching, say, a movie about D-Day, which is pretty topical, if you're watching a movie about D-Day, how many hundreds of hours, thousands of hours did they spend? Hello, Toulouse here. Did they spend planning D-Day? Well, if you're watching, Saving Private Ryan, you don't want to see that planning of D-Day. It opens smack dab in the middle of a landing craft where you're seeing all of these men that are just terrified about to land on Normandy Beach. Dog one, wherever they're landing. I mean, it's you don't want to watch that. It happened in your mind. Well, they had to have planned this at some point, of course. But watching it would be kind of not fun. You don't want to do that. So I agree with you, James. You are smack dab correct, sir. You appreciate war movies editing out their planning phases. Unless you have a sequence like in Star Wars where the planning phase is necessary to the plot so the audience understands where all the X-Wings and Y-Wings are trying to get get that proton torpedo into the exhaust port. That's important. That's plot. It helps. Mark C says, I thought Godzilla was a good fun movie. Although I also think the editing heavy-handed dude needed to back away from the avid. Well, that could be. I mean, but it's not exactly a genre that's known for its subtlety. But I think that's a valid criticism. I mean, I wouldn't take that away from you. Bill Barkley, I don't know why you said this. D'Artagnan and the Three Muskehounds. That's funny. But yeah, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, it's editorially you can be a heavy-handed editor, but sometimes things call for heavy-handed editing. I think that would be. It depends. Fun Gus says, "Is Rob getting ripped today?" No, this is ice water. I do not get ripped during the day, and you know what? I've kind of been cutting down on the alcohol. I've cut down greatly, as a matter of fact, trying to get back in shape a little bit. Hitting the heavy bag in the backyard. So yeah, I am trying to do that. So no, this is just water. It is not vodka or gin. And I am an ice water guy. Like when you go to Europe, they're not really about ice in Europe, but I love ice water. Give me a frosty, cold beverage. I love it. Benjamin 23 says, Sports Channel. Thank you, sir. First of all, my opinion, Raiders and Crusade are the best Indiana Jones movies. Do you think it is accidental that they had two things in common, Nazis and Judeo-Christian artifacts? That's an interesting question. One, first of all, I have to say that I don't agree with you. I think Last Crusade is the third in line. I think it's the third best Indiana Jones movie. I am a Raiders Temple of Doom fan myself. I think Crusade is silly, and I think it's sloppily made. And Spielberg has even copped to that, like the tank chase at the end, they basically made up. I think the visual effects are lackluster, and I don't like the way that Sala and Marcus Brody are treated in the movies. They're basically put in there as comedy relief. And I always hark back to John Rhys Davies in the first movie, the conversation when he's explaining to Indy that Belloc is heading up the conversation. He's like, there is one amongst them. He is very smart. They call him Beloche. And Belloc. Sala is a smart guy. He's not he's not a buffoon, and he kind of becomes a buffoon. And Denholm Elliott, as he says in Raiders, if he was a younger man, he would have gone after the Ark himself. Basically, Marcus Brody was Indiana Jones before Indiana Jones became Indiana Jones. And I didn't like the way they were treated in Last Crusade. I thought Last Crusade was a bit flippant, and that's fine. There was a lot of flippancy in Temple of Doom, but I do think that look, Nazis are great villains. They're some of my favorite villains. Killing Nazis to me is always a good thing on screen in movies because they're the best dressed villains. They're inherently evil. What's it called when you're playing a role playing game? What's that terminology? They're evil, whatever that is, and you got to love Nazis. So I think there is definitely some truth. I don't think it's accidental that they had two things in common. I think that Nazis and Christian artifacts, both the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant, are interesting artifacts to go after. And I think that, for Western audiences, they immediately have resonance. But I also think the Sankara stones in Temple of Doom are interesting because if you go after artifacts and antiquities, there are a lot of really interesting ancient civilizations that have existed that have nothing to do with Judeo-Christianity. And I think that's really, really cool. I mean, a lot of the megaliths around, not just Stonehenge, but a lot of there's some really creepy ancient civilization remnants around that can be the basis for an Indiana Jones movie. And I think you look, I understand that everybody loves Last Crusade. I do. I did love Sean Connery, but it was funny to me that there was if you remember things like Lethal Weapon 3, there were third movies that were coming out that were they skewed more comedic because they would have comedy in them. Like there's that almost, it's not slapstick, but it is comedic when Willie Scott and Indiana Jones are both getting ready to spend the night together with one another. They know they're both going to do it, and then they get sidetracked. But you see them preparing, and then there's the goofy scene at the banquet hall when they're monkey brains. There's all of that. There's a lot of overt humor, whereas in Raiders, there was humor, but it was a little bit harder edged. And obviously, you've got Short Round in Temple of Doom, and I prefer the harder edge of Raiders. And I think that we sort of lost that in the franchise, which was kind of a bummer. That's why I think Raiders stands head and shoulders above the other Indiana Jones movies. But I do love Temple of Doom because it really harked back to its the serials of the 30s and 40s. It really harked back to those things, and I thought that they were great. Bear Falcon says Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster were in Cleveland, and that is the city Metropolis was based on. Superman by Larry Tye is a great book on Soup's history. Yes, that is true. And that's why the city was named Metropolis. However, I think as the mythology progressed, especially in the comics, and certainly on by the time you even watching George Reeves playing Superman, and I could be wrong about this, but I always saw that as being in New York City. I didn't think about it as being in Cleveland. So I think it evolved. Just like Superman didn't fly at first. He was able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, so he didn't fly. A comic doctor says, hello, Rob. I'm very interested in your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics for real. Been searching for these. By the way, your vlog is the best. Listen, I know you I think you contacted me about my comic books. Those are comic books I unfortunately wouldn't part with. I apologize. Everything else, there's certain comics I wouldn't part with. And they're not necessarily the most valuable comics. Those are valuable, but they just mean something to me. It's when I pick them up. So I want to hang on to those. But if anybody is interested, all my comics are up for grabs. I'm going to sell everything, cheap, cheap, cheap. And I have a lot of garbage, by the way. I mean, if you're interested in my comic books, I've got a lot of DC stuff. A lot of DC comics, a lot of Marvel too, but a lot of DC stuff. I have a lot of X-Men, and there are comics like I do have I have a full run of New Mutants. I was going to sell like my entire run from 1 to 100. That includes the first appearance of Deadpool. That includes the first appearance of Cable as well. Although I might pull those out and get them graded and sell them for more. But I do want to get rid of comics because they're just taking up too much space, and I need to get rid of things. So if you're interested in comics, I'm willing to sell them cheap from the 80s if there's stuff that you want. Mostly more DC. And I've got a lot of weird, obscure comics too, like Sonic Disruptors that I don't know why anyone would want them. But if you do, I have a lot of those. Comics like Alien Legion, stuff like that I like. Strike Force Morituri. I loved all that stuff. But yes, I'm going to get rid of everything. I don't know the funny thing is I don't even know if people want comics anymore. Sighing Cassandra says, I love the Predator movies some more than others. However, I watched that franchise die with the last one. How is that even possible? It is not that I asked for Goethe. I don't get it. Sighing Cassandra, yes, I don't know. I think Shane Black's the Predator. I don't know what happened. I know there's probably a lot of studio interference and they didn't quite make the movie what they wanted. I don't know. But it is a bummer. I think the Predator franchise, I really liked, for instance, the Predator 2, the script for Predator 2, but they cut out a half an hour out of the movie for pacing. And I don't know, I believe I did see that version of the film, but they just cut too much out. And I thought Predator 2 was really respectable, and I really liked it. And I thought they did the same thing to Predator 2 that they did to The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, which, is not a great movie, but I liked The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. I saw a much longer cut of The Adventures of Ford Fairlane that I liked very much. And they cut a half an hour out of that too. And I thought it was really unfortunate. But yes, the Predator franchise, although Predators isn't bad, but the Predator, man, really disappointed me. It really disappointed me. I'm right there with you, Sighing Cassandra. John Suntress is here from the Word Balloon podcast, which I did a great I recorded a 3-hour podcast with John the other day. John says, RE Nazis. Was there a missed opportunity in Endgame where Cap didn't face the Red Skull? Maybe him with Widow instead of Hawkeye. Maybe. I think that is a missed opportunity. If I had made Endgame, I understand why they wanted the credits to do with what they did. I get that. I would have shot an end sequence of Captain America returning all the stones and Mjolnir back to where it was, because it begs the question. And I think if everybody would have been able to clearly understand, and maybe they did, who knows? I don't know. But I would have done that. And then between when the cast signs off, the regular cast and the cast does a sign off, I would have put it right there. And I thought it would a coda, if you will. And I think it would have been really satisfying to see Cap's adventure back in time. And then, and maybe one last look. But, I really loved Endgame. I really loved Endgame. And by the way, if you haven't, the Word Balloon podcast, please check it out. It is a fantastic pop culture podcast. You have many, 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 many hours to listen to, and it's great. Stubble McShave says, the prologue of Raiders is very similar to Bond intros. The difference is that Indy fails, whereas Bond succeeds. You know what? I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I don't think he fails, though, because he absolutely succeeds in getting the idol. I mean, he really does succeed. And I think that it's great. And it is like a Bond movie. I really love the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And by the way, I love the opening in Club Obi-Wan in Temple of Doom as well. By the way, Stubble McShave, you reminded me that, yes, Stubble sent me a letter, and I'm going to read Stubble's letter. Stubble says, "Hi, Rob, the Magnificent." Well, thank you, if I do say so myself. "This morning, I watched some of your show from yesterday, where you talked about maybe not getting to watch a lot of your acquired movies and TV series because there wasn't enough time." Now, I gotta interject here. I don't know who wrote me. Somebody wrote me back. I don't have it in front of me. But when I said I had about 2,500 Blu-rays and 4K discs, and that if I watched like 2 a week, how long it would take me to get through my entire collection, the answer to that question is 24 years. 24 years. And I it's like, why collect anything anymore? Like I at first I remember thinking to myself, I was going to stop collecting things when I was like 45. First, I was going to stop collecting comics when Sandman was over. Then I was going to stop collecting things when I was 45. Then it was 50. And now I'm really grappling with wanting to stop collecting things and, building the models that I haven't built and reading the books I haven't read and going through the comics or the omnibuses that I need yet to read again. And it's like, I should read these things and give them away and disseminate them to the world. Like, why? I have literally thousands of books, and I have thousands of books. And what good are they? They're just sitting there. And I look at my books and they all remind me, like my Stephen King hardcovers. Like I showed you, or once long ago, I think I showed when I first started the show that I had my first hardcover edition of It that I bought when it first came out, Stephen King's It from 1986. So I had it. It's in a Bro Dart, one of those Mylar sleeves that protect the dust jacket. It's been sitting on a shelf. I've read it. I read it once in the summer of 86 when it came out. And I should give it to somebody who wants it. But then on the other hand, I'm like, I've carried that book around now for 33 years. And I feel that way about my Star Trek books or everything. And it gets to the point where you're like, well, when is enough enough? Like, what good are these things? Like, I should be making more stuff. Like, I'm trying to make more stuff. And as I told you, I have a big idea when I reach 50,000 subscribers that I'm going to implement that is going to make all of us into something that is going to take the Post-Geek Singularity to the next level. But it's going to take me that long because I have to plan it and there's legalities involved. But I wonder, but anyway, back to your letter, Stubble. Now, I don't have as much physical media as you do, but I still got quite a lot. A few months ago, I decided to make an effort to watch through most of my DVDs and Blu-rays. I decided to make several projects of it. I started with watching through my war movies collection, followed by my Hitchcock movies, and now I'm on the 6th season of Deep Space Nine. I've given myself permission to skip some entries in each category. For example, I skipped Move Along Home from season 1 of Deep Space Nine. Don't blame you, sir. I will probably skip Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and Die Another Day in my Bond run, which is next. Don't skip them because it's really interesting to watch them in context as you go through the Bond films, because Diamonds Are Forever and Live and Let Die represented the early 70s and where the Bond franchise was at and where the mindset was at. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating look into the time these movies came out. After Bond, I will probably watch Kubrick movies. Wholeheartedly agree with you there. And then I've got my sights on Mel Brooks. Awesome. After that, it'll probably be Abrams and Zucker with Airplane and the Naked Gun movies. Don't forget Top Secret. Within a few years, I may have gone through a substantial part of my collection, and then it will be a time for a rewatch again. I will, of course, consume the new things coming along in theaters and at my home, and maybe, just maybe, add them to my collection. Although now I'm being more and more conservative about expanding it with new material. I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner. Take care, Stubble. Does that mean, Stubble, that you got Hannibal on Blu-ray? Or pardon me, 4K. Hannibal was recently released on 4K. I think it was Kino Lorber's first 4K release, which I didn't pick up, but I want to. But here's the thing. Like, I have a hard time. Apocalypse Now, the final cut, is coming out, which is sort of an amalgamation of the theatrical version, which is my favorite, and then the Redux, Apocalypse Now Redux, which not that big of a fan of, although it's interesting. And I'm going to buy it because it also includes the theatrical version and Redux all in remastered in 4K. But the thing is, how many times have I owned Apocalypse Now? I owned it on VHS. I owned it on Laserdisc. I owned it on DVD. I owned it on Blu-ray. and I'm going to buy the final cut. Like how many times have I bought Dawn of the Dead? So many times. And I am going to buy Dawn of the Dead yet again when the release comes out from Second Sight in the UK, when they've remastered it in 4K and put it out. I bought the 4K Italian version so I could have the Nicholas Winding Refn restoration in 4K of Dawn of the Dead. I mean, it's like, how often do you have to do this? It's a little insane, and it's compulsive and weird, to be honest. But I feel the need to buy these things. But I too am buying less and less things. I mean, I bought Demon Lover, Oliver Assayas' movie with Connie Nielsen from the UK. I haven't received it yet, but Arrow put it out. Arrow is putting out William Friedkin's Cruising. I feel the need that I have to get that because I'm a William Friedkin completist. Yes, even The Brinks Job and Deal of the Century. And it's weird. I mean, it's weird when you're a collector that we do these kinds of weird things. And it's really starting to, I feel like I'm in pretty great health. I don't have any medicine. I don't have any prescription medication at all. I'm working out. I feel pretty damn good for being my age, aside from wearing glasses to read now, which is something that snuck up on me. But I wonder, man, if how long am I going to collect things? How long do I want to buy Hot Toys figures for? I think it's kind of interesting that I kind of feel that the Marvel Hot Toys figures, like I see an end to my Marvel Hot Toys figures. I mean, there's a finite number that I want to buy. I think it's less than 10 now, and then I'm done. I'm done buying Hot Toys figures as far as Marvel is concerned. Now I'll still buy Star Wars figures or whatever, but there'll be an end. And I want to like stop buying model kits or build all the ones that I have. The collecting thing is weird because at the end of the day, when you die, nobody's going to care about anything you collected, and all you've done is left behind a mass of detritus that all of your relatives have to get rid of. They can sell. But anyway, Mark C says, if you have a copy of John Byrne's She-Hulk number 40, the jump rope issue, I'll take it. It's the last one I need to complete my run. Well, Mark, I don't know if I have that. I will look for that. I wasn't a big She-Hulk fan, but I will look. Joe Lynch just sent me a super chat, but he didn't say anything. I will say thank you to Joe. That was very generous. Thank you for supporting the channel. That's very nice. It's funny about the comic books too. To be honest, here's a weird insight into my psyche. So my comic book collection, for the most part, I bought them all. And I bought them all mostly when they were new off the rack at comic book stores. And my comic book buying era was between 1983 and 2005 to 10. Let's just say 2008 till the crash, when everybody was out of money. So 1983 to 2008, I bought lots of comics. But all of those represented trips to the comic book store. And there are some trips to the comic book store I remember more than others. Like I look at my Crisis on Infinite Earths comics, and they meant so much to me when they were coming out because I love DC and all those Dark Knight Returns. I've got first editions of those. The Killing Joke, Ronin, Moon Knight, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Teen Titans. I mean, all these things that were part of that I read religiously. American Flag, John Sable Freelance, all these titles that I love and have entire runs of. Like I have the entire run of Mike Grell's Green Arrow. It's great. I love it. Now, it's not really worth much. Maybe the Longbow Hunters is worth much, but it's like I've often thought I just will put out my long boxes and just blow them out. Here, take every one of these comics, 50 cents. I don't care. Even if it's whatever it is, whatever you find in there. Spider-Man 300 or the Web of Spider-Man when he first is in his black costume, whatever. It's all a buck. I don't care. 50 cents. But they all represent, I think to myself, I'm like, oh, I want these comics. Like, why do I want them? They're nostalgia. I usually have them in hardcover. Like, I look over here. I'll give you an example. Here's a perfect example. So I have a first edition of The Killing Joke. Bought it when it was off the rack. But now I have this. Now I have the absolute edition of The Killing Joke, right? It's beautiful. This is incredible. I love the DC absolute editions. Love them. They're awesome. Now, I love taking this. The artwork is bigger. It's printed on both newsprint. What's crazy about this version is they printed it on newsprint paper. There's two versions of it in here. Plus, it's in this awesome slipcase. I mean, I love this. Is like an object to art, and so I have it right now. I don't need my original Killing Joke, or I think about 3 copies of the original Killing Joke, first editions. They're like in mint condition. They were I stored them in Mylar sleeves, right? So I have them, but it would be hard for me to part with them. Like I haven't taken those comics out or put my fingers on them in 20 years. Because I've had the graphic novel version. Now I have the absolute version, which is badass. What more do you want? And yet I still have this comic version. And imagine that times 15,000. Just probably have 15,000 comics. I mean, like I've got all the DC Star Trek comics. You know, I feel like if I sold them, I got to sell them in bulk. You have to have them all. You have to take them all off my hands because I don't want to break them up piecemeal. It bummed me out. So, you know, I think that's kind of weird. It's just this weird thing. Like I just want them gone. Plus, I could use the money. I would put them towards something. I would invest the money. I might buy the rest of the hot toys I need and then invest the money. You know what? I don't know. Mark C says, remember, Rob, he who dies with the most toys wins. I used to have that bumper sticker. I had a pin that says that, but then I also got a pin that said, he who dies with the most toys is dead, which I liked. You know, I don't have kids myself, and I thought, which is strange to me that I don't have kids. When I was married, my wife didn't want to have kids, which I didn't know. And I thought I would bequeath all of this. I mean, my nightmare would have been to have kids that had no interest in any of this, but I think I would have raised them to where they would have had an interest, and we would have, at least we could have put stuff in glass cases together or something. But now I've got all this stuff that I just don't need. And selling comics is a pain in the ass. You know, that's why I feel I should have like one, like comics, all comics 50 cents. I mean, I've got like 15,000 comics. So if every comic sold for 50 cents, no matter what it was, but I couldn't do that because I could not knowingly put the first appearance of Deadpool that's in mint condition or the first appearance of Cable from New Mutants in a box and sell those for 50 cents. I'd just be an idiot. I should drop the green and get them graded and sell them not for the 300 or 400 or 500 or whatever they sell for, but sell them for like, you know, $100. So somebody gets a deal. That's what I should do. Robert Perez says, what are your thoughts about the Vader Kenobi fight fan film made? You know, and any Netflix recommendations for movies or shows? You know what? I'll tell you something. I liked it. I thought it was really well done. What I didn't like is I did not like how they did not follow the style, the style of the cinematography of Star Wars. They kept adding modern cinematography into it. I get why they did it, but I would have been more impressed if they kept the very composed, the beautiful compositions of Star Wars. And what is it? It was just too modern for me. And also the point of that scene was not an epic knockdown, drag out battle between those two. It was a different vibe. And I feel that it was a cool lightsaber duel, but it wasn't really in line with what was going on in Star Wars at that time. But it was cool. I thought it was really well done and clever. But to me, it also had something to say about the mindset of where fandom is at and what matters. Because I think the context of what that was, a cool fight's a cool fight. Everyone likes a cool lightsaber duel. But in terms of what was happening in the movie at that time, it really was sort of out of place. But at least that's how I saw it. Stub McShave says, I prefer to call the 2000s the naughties. That is funny. I like that. Did you say was I reading that wrong? The naughties, but see, that sounds like as a riff on the 90s, but it's the naughties. I kind of like that. You know what? Maybe you're right. I'm gonna start doing that. Mark C asks, does the Killing Joke Absolute Edition have the original colors, or is it the recolored version? Well, that's one of the reasons I love this so much. Let me see if I can show it to you here, if you can see it. So there's two versions. If you can see, as you see right here, there's two versions of the Killing Joke in this. Can you see that? Oh, here, let me put this up. You can't really see it, but they're broken up here and then in the middle here. So it's got recolored glossy color here, because it's basically the paper. But then it has the original coloring with more of a newsprint feel here. And I mean, you can't do justice on this thing, but it's badass. And, I'm not saying that DC is beyond reproach, because some of the things that they do with their absolute editions, well, not usually their absolute editions are amazing, but some of the things they've done with their omnibuses have pissed me off. Especially like in the Teen Titans omnibuses. They didn't just do the Teen Titans run. It was mostly the Marv Wolfman and Perez run. And they left out a lot, and it wasn't in order. And I hate that. I hate when they do that. But this absolute Killing Joke is absolutely marvelous. So I recommend it highly. Plus, there's massive amounts of extras, and it's great. It's great. Matouine? Is it Matouine? Matouine, I may have missed your take on what is your opinion on the upcoming Dark Crystal series. Have you collected any artwork from Brian Froud? His imaginative style was a childhood favorite of mine. I do have a few Brian Froud art books that I got back in the day when I was a little bit more than a kid when Dark Crystal came out. I cannot wait for this new Dark Crystal series. Look, I'll be honest. When I was a kid, I loved Dark Crystal, but it was still slow and deliberately paced, and it was hard to get into with no human characters to identify with. But I really appreciated the craft, and I loved the score. I thought it was great. I thought the new Dark Crystal looks amazing. I think it looks incredibly amazing. I can't even believe that we're seeing it. I know people that are working on the show. Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, it looks to me unbelievable. I cannot wait to see this Dark Crystal show. I really can't. I really think it's going to be amazing. And thanks, by the way, for I don't recognize you. I think that might be your first chat and supporting the channel, which I appreciate very much so. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but these chats are always brought to you by Lucky Tiger men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And for those of you who are interested in Lucky Tiger products, and I highly recommend them, you can go to getluckytiger.com. And if you want to buy any of their products, punch in PGS Post-Geek Singularity upon checkout, and you will get 20% off your order. I particularly love their facial scrub and their all-over body wash. And I've said this before, but their facial scrub, all of their products are very light and citrusy, and they're not overpowering. And you can use them with any cologne or anything like that. And I really like them. So it's good. It's good. I enjoy them. And yeah. So, and by the way, thanks for all the support of the channel. I really appreciate it. But it's the collecting thing. It's just it's weird to me. It's really weird. And I think collectors have weird problems. Like, I don't know what this. I'll tell you another weird. I'll tell you another weird problem. Like, you can't really see it, but if you because I haven't finished setting up these. But these two shelves have Avengers. Now, not all the Avengers, but like my favorite Avengers characters. Like, I have other multiple characters, but I only put my favorite ones up. Now, this is the first Avengers Captain America. I didn't buy any of the Captain Americas after that, even though I wanted them. I just didn't have the cash to buy them. I did pre-order the Infinity War Captain America because I think that's pretty definitive, and I wanted the Mjolnir and the Broken Shield. But like this you can't really see it. I don't think you can see it here because it's not. This Iron Man is the Age of Ultron Iron Man. It's my favorite Iron Man, and it's the die-cast Iron Man figure. It's great. Now, I have a bunch of Iron Man. Like, I've got Iron Patriot. I have the Iron Man 3 die-cast. But I'm not an Iron Man. I don't want to have every armor. I just want my favorite Iron Man armor. But I did get the Infinity War Iron Man armor. That's cool. It's cool. But I like this Iron Man armor better. It might be my favorite Iron Man armor. And I wonder, like, maybe I should sell my Iron Man Infinity War armor because I just don't like it as much. And I'm not going to buy the accessory pack that's $250. Who's got the money? So maybe I'll do what I do with my Hot Toys figures. You sell them and you get money to replace them. So it's a sort of, after you've bought one, it's a zero-sum game. You can keep trading them up. But I really sit here and ponder, like, which Iron Man armor do I like? And, like, why do I have the Iron Man 3 die-cast armor? Why would I display it? It's not part of the Avengers armor, so I would never display it. It's weird. You have to play these weird, ridiculous games with yourself that nobody could possibly care about except you. And it makes me feel weird sometimes that I even spend any time at all when I should be making movies or writing stories or finishing the children's book that Elizabeth and I are working on. But yeah, these are the kind of weird things that that collectors talk about, but I don't know if anybody admits to them publicly, as I am doing right now. It gets weird when you're a collector. So let's see. Now I am being asked by Robert Perez if I'm a fan of the Gray Jedi. Now, before I answer that question, I'm gonna look into this, because the term Gray Jedi, or Gray, had two meanings. First, it was used by the Jedi and the Sith to describe Force users who walked the line between the light and dark sides of the Force without surrendering to the dark side. And second, it described Jedi who distanced themselves from the Jedi Council and operated outside of the strictures of the Jedi Code. However, those who were considered to be true Gray Jedi met both qualifications and did not belong to any particular Force tradition. One example was Jolie Bindo, a former Jedi Padawan and a Gray Jedi that served the Old Republic. So Robert is asking me if I'm a fan of the Gray Jedi. I would imagine that the rise of Skywalker has something to do with being a Gray Jedi, that I think the ultimate purpose of what a Skywalker is supposed to be, at least when I first heard that title, is that maybe the title Force user is going to be supplanted by the term Skywalker. So the rise of Skywalker would be the rise of a new Jedi Order, where the everyman, like I always thought the everyman, anybody could be a Force user because the Force surrounds us and binds us together. So, to be honest, Robert, this is the first time anyone's asked me whether I'm a fan of the Gray Jedi or not, and I don't know how to answer, because I don't know necessarily if I am one. But I think that being a Gray Jedi would be the ultimate progression of the galaxy, that everybody would kind of have to be. But I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of walking the line and not being necessarily a Jedi or Sith, but being a Force user. Mark C says, Rob, Iron Man's Endgame armor is the closest to the comics classic version. Yeah, no, it is. But I mean, I've had Iron Man figures my whole life. But there's something about, I don't necessarily think the comics classic version is the best version of the armor. I don't know. But the Infinity War armors, it's cool. But, ultimately, when I have my Hot Toys Avengers setup, when it's all in place, once it's done, it's done. I don't want to have to buy more. That's the thing. It's, as a collector, I'm like, I don't like, there are people that want all the Iron Man armor. And by the way, I admire those people and I love looking at their YouTube videos of their collections. But yeah, I don't know if I need all of them. Do I need all of them? I don't know. James Gleason says he loves Godzilla versus Megalon. I did too, but let's face it, it's pretty goofy. Pretty goofy. Well, let's see, everyone. It is now 2:34 my time. Maybe I should bring this one to a close. Probably so, because I have other work I need to do. But this has been kind of a fun chat. What do people think? Do you? What if? And would I? I'm curious to hear what people have to say about that in the comments section. Do you watch movies that way? I don't know. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank those people for supporting the channel who do on a daily basis. It's very much appreciated. It keeps me going, keeps these chats going. I want to thank Lucky Tiger for their sponsorship. I want to thank all of you, the imagination connoisseurs and members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I will be back on John Campia's show tomorrow, and we're actually going to be recording. If you haven't listened to this week's Inglorious Treksperts podcast, we kind of give a harsh analysis of Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. But remember, it's all with love. And I hope we're going to be doing some more best, worst movie podcasts soon, because people seem to really dig those. And again, I just want to thank you all for being here. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And if you could, please support the channel by clicking subscribe, clicking like, clicking the little button. And keep sending me letters at Burnettwork.net. I love getting the letters, and I think they make these chats what they are. I like this sense of community. I really appreciate what you all have to say. So I want to thank my moderators finally, Jim and Terry and Mike Bodden, who's still on vacation, and Greg Smith. Thank you for all that you do. Thanks for being here and listening and putting up with me. One day I'm going to have some moderator, or we'll have a moderator party in London. I'll get Jim to come and Mike Bodden will come, and I'll get Greg to come because we're going to be in London. Remember, Robservations is going to be coming to you in London on April 3rd because we're going to go see the very first public showing of Bond 25 in England in Leicester Square at the Odeon Theater. So be there. And afterwards, we're all going to go drink lots of pints of ale. And we're going to drink the very finest ales from around the world, just like Withnail and I did before us. So thanks for being here. And remember, as always, I tell you to have a better day. Thanks very much, and I'll see you tomorrow.